Hey everybody, Gregg Bendian back here at the PROGCAST. And if you're a fan of creative and adventurous music, then you no doubt know my guest today, who's actually been on the program before. I'm so happy to welcome him back. If you know him, you love him as the singer and lyricist and multi-instrumentalist, and probably also as a music executive, but he's back on the show, and I'm very happy to welcome Derek Shulman. Hi, Derek.
Hi, Greg. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. The new book, Giant Steps, My Improbable Journey from Stage Lights to Executive Heights, is coming out in the fall.
October 7th. Yep.
October 7th. And people can pre-order?
Yep. People can pre-order online. There's a site that on the Gentle Giant site, my personal site, and other people's sites. So, yeah, you can pre-order and it will be available when it's published.
I'm very excited that this is happening because lucky enough to receive an advance copy from you and your people, and just mind-blowing to me the amount of stuff I did not really know about your beginnings. I think when we had spoken before, and speaking with Carrie and some of the other guys, I knew that there was adversity that had been overcome. But before we get into all of that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, the importance of your family in the beginnings of your life, not just in terms of music, but in terms of attitudes and morals and just a worldview that I think served you through your entire life. Would that be fair?
Yes, it would be. I think people who read this book, it's not, as you're one of the very few people who have had access to it. It's not a crash and burn and a rehab and the rock and roll story. It's more of a, I hope, family, moral, and authentic book, like I felt hopefully Gentle Giant's music was. Because when I decided to do this, I wasn't going to, make something. I didn't want some kind of sensational, silly book that a lot of things are that I've seen on my shelf, actually, that, you see and they're the same old story. So it's a story about my family and how we were brought up and what happened and why we were who we were. And family is very, very important to me, as you probably read in the book. And the family, which is, your, no matter how you regard your siblings and your parents, and you're still family. And you've read that, I've had our fallings out, but certainly we all continue to be family, and that's the most important thing. My family here, my wife and kids, they're the same way. I mean, as well as music, which is the big. We had, again, for me, the three gluing things that were part of what the book's about is family, music, and a good moral.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is, I have to say, I found inspiring because there's no pulling punches in the opening of the story. And what you guys had to go through with the loss of your dad, who was a major figure in your life, clearly a huge inspiration and an educator just in the way he lived music.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. We all, thankfully, have his DNA and genetic makeup. In fact, my dad was an incredible musician. He could pick up literally any instrument, and he's a sight reader and sight read it, and literally be a maestro at it within 5 minutes. How and why and where he got it from, I have no idea. But I guess it trickled down to his children and, Ray, Phil, myself, my brother Terry, my sister Eve. We all had the same. Music was always around the house, and good values too. I won't say religious values, but certainly, my our being Jewish, but not religious at all. but that the morals of that were important too.
I was curious, did you ever gain any insight into where your father got this musical gene, where it comes from in his world?
Um, well, I certainly know my grandfather, who he had a very tough life. Um, he was raised by his great grandmother, but his father, my grandfather, who I never met, um, his my grandmother died when she was only 17 years old. She had my father and died right after. My grandfather's second wife did not want my father around, so he was raised by his great grandmother. But my grandfather in Glasgow, he was an immigrant from Lithuania, and he was an incredible carver, and he carved extraordinary pieces of wood which are being displayed in various synagogues in Glasgow. And so I think the uh, the creative gene comes from there. But I don't know my mother. Sorry, my grandmother. My mother was also, she loved music. She loved to dance, but she was a very supportive mother, and that's something which is important to me because when my father was playing, every night, she made sure that we were keeping going to school. Education was important to us, and she made sure that we had our clothes were clean and we had our lunches, etc. But again, not that we had much money. In fact, we hardly any. But nevertheless, she was always there, and my father was playing gigs at night. So yeah, there's lots of interesting things that you realize in retrospect when you're older or old like me, what affected you and what was it that made you who you were.
I can't tell how old you are by looking at you, so let's just leave it at that.
I appreciate that.
Derek, there's so many stories in the beginning. I know we can't get to them all, but just the thing that I loved was the story of you coming to the stair in your pajamas as a kid and watching a session going on or a hang or a musician hang going on. And your dad says, go to bed. And you say, no, I want to watch.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. He'd come home from a gig. He was a trumpeter and a dance band leader. He loved jazz, I mean, modern jazz and classical. But when he came home, excuse me, when the gig was finished, 10:30, 11 o'clock, he'd invite friends home and he'd go to the front room and they would jam. I mean, for just purely for its own sake, just to play, bebop or modern jazz, and then they'd go into other things. And my brother Phil, who's elder, he'd be part of it. He loved that music, and he's much older than us, 10 years older. And then I listened to it, and I'd come down, and here I was, like 5 or 6 or 7 years old or whatever, and go back and I wanted to see what was going on, and I would hang out and I'd see all these players he played with at his gig, but also he'd bring back other players who would be in town. I mean, jazz musicians and the dance band musicians just to hang. So that's how much music meant to him. It wasn't to be on stage or make money or be famous. It was to play music. I guess that part of his DNA all definitely was part of our DNA, of course.
So clearly, yes. And you were at that point starting musical training or unknowingly being trained by your dad's presence and the people around him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You only realize in retrospect that being a musician and playing music was going to be your life. I remember, I think it's in the book, when I went, I was lucky enough to go to grammar school in England. I and passed the exams. We all did very well. I mean, again, in our education was very important as well to the family. Educate, but music was ultimately the most important. And I remember, as I said, you mentioned in the book, when the in a grammar school, it was all boys. It was, it was very strict. It was, like what they call publics. You've seen it in TV where the teachers wear mortarboards and hats, and we're talking about very strict. And the careers master would come in and at 14 years old and suggest where you should go and where you should stream. Most of the boys at that school would be either scientists or doctors or philosophers or whatever, be a professional. And I remember saying, I'm going to be a rock star. And the kids, around me laughed. I mean, yeah, right. And then this career master said, don't be silly. You will never, that will never happen because it happens to 1 in a million. That won't happen. And within 3 or 4 years, I was on top of the pops in England and just leaving school. And I remember actually signing autographs when I was leaving school to the teachers, which is quite a trip, actually.
That's a trip indeed. And, to the extent that I really enjoyed the pre-Giant part of the book, I guess I didn't realize to what level you guys rose as teen idols.
Yeah, it was a great grounding. Honestly, it was a great grounding to, first of all, to be good musicians, because in those days, we played about 10 gigs a week. We're talking about all-nighters, and you had to be damn good to make a good living. And, this is all over Europe and England. And so, yeah, it was a good experience to do that, even as kids, which we were, and to bring in to Gentle Giant, because we learned how to entertain as well as play music. And that was very important to the Gentle Giant. We didn't stand there and look at our instruments and pretend we were the London Symphony Orchestra. We knew that we had to. We had fun. We had fun playing, and that's something that I think people can see on YouTube. That Gentle Giant had, enjoyed being with each other and playing for each other. But we enjoyed playing. So we smile when we played something really well. And the audience to smile back, as opposed to thinking they're at some, again, serious concert. We had fun playing our music.
Well, the fun always came across in the Giant show, and the fun of the unexpected, which is, I think, one of the joys I still derive from listening to Giant, is where did that come from? Oh, it's related to this earlier thing that Kerry did. And I always found it fascinating that you made it look easy.
Well, we did rehearse a lot. We worked hard. We were hard workers. And that's something, again, we got from being in the prior band, but also from our family. We worked hard because, poverty is hard to break out of, and especially if you read the book, especially in my situation, it was difficult and it was shameful, honestly. And I didn't want to be poor. Not rich. I don't want to be rich. I just wanted to make a good living. So we worked hard to do it.
And it's also interesting to me that given the fact that you work hard, you get signed, you're working with Jerry Braun, and you are on top of the pops, you're making that interesting transition, which I've spoken to a lot of, not just British musicians, but musicians of that period, where we're kind of shifting out of R&B into psychedelia and into so-called progressive music. And you could have sat quite nicely and just said, well, I'm going to be a pop star. I get recognized on the street. I can meet girls very easily. And this is a really great life. and then something else kicks in. And I was always curious if this is, because in the book it really comes across as you and Ray and bringing Phil in. And I had always thought, well, Phil's the mastermind here because he's the older brother. He's 10 years older. He's going to, lay down the law. But no, you guys were really the ones, I think, that were thinking, let's go forward, to the dismay of Braun. But seriously, you just said, look, enough of this. We're going here now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
You mean me, us bringing Phil in the beginning, or
the transition out of Simon Dupree into something more ambitious, maybe?
Well, no, Jerry was very intrinsic in supporting our vision. When we talked about Simon Dupree, we were still very popular. We could play to pretty big crowds most everywhere. We were making a good living. I mean, we were able to buy houses for our families, etc. But musically, it was really stifling. It was almost like having a couple of hits, or like having millstones around your neck, because we weren't able to progress ourselves musically. We were getting better and better, and understanding you could do different things and still be good at it. So we decided to break up the band, and we went to various managers, including people like Don Ard, and et cetera. But Jerry Braun understood this, and he said he believed in our musicality, and said, "Okay, I'll sponsor you. I'll pay you guys a salary, and you just rehearse and do what you do." And we had literally 6 to 7, 8 months of rehearsing, getting a new band together, getting Kerry Minier involved, getting Gary Green, getting a new drummers, et cetera, and the brothers putting a new band together to play music that we wanted to play. We didn't know what it's going to be, but we knew we wanted to do something really different and experimental, I guess is the word. And Gentle Giant was born out of that.
Yeah, and I've known the name Jerry Braun forever because as a youngling, I was quite a big Uriah Heep fan, remain so to this day. Mick Box is really a prince, and Braun is handling Keith Emerson and the Nice, I think, also at that time.
He was Hawkwind, Gong. I can't remember who else, but certainly Jerry. That was a period of time when your managers and entrepreneurs loved music.
Yeah.
It wasn't about analytics. It wasn't about YouTube. It wasn't about, they loved music and musicians. And we were lucky in that we had, Jerry, who was the son of a publisher, who just loved music and musicians. And he couldn't do it himself, but he was able to help bands develop. And we were lucky that Jerry was there at the beginning. So
fascinating. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your mentions in the book of these other bands that you start listening to that inspired some of Giant. And this has come across many different people that I've interviewed that went into so-called progressive or creative music, but the importance of Frank Zappa.
Zappa was absolutely one of the first bands that we heard that were combining jazz, classical, rock, and doing things that we said, okay, we would like to do. And there were other bands, but certainly Zappa was a big influence. Yes, I can't deny that, absolutely. And I think Frank Zappa enjoyed Gentle Giant, from what I understand.
Yes, we have heard this. Yes.
We were, and we played with Zappa several times, and it was, he was an incredible musician, and we also loved his cynicism, and he's kind of like, he could have been a Schulman brother,
Yeah, he sounded a bit like Phil, maybe.
Exactly that. That's what I was thinking.
And
amazing, by the way.
I'm sorry.
I just spoke to Phil he's got the book, and he's looking at it, so he's scratching his head. Did I do that? Yep. Anyway, enough.
Yes. Well, but please tell tell us a little bit about Phil that we don't maybe already know. I mean, because, among the Giant fans, he is really revered as an important part of the beginnings of the group and the development of the group and the steering of the group towards interesting topical, conceptual ideas rather than just merely being a lyricist or merely being the horn player in the band.
Well, yeah, Phil was Phil is an incredibly bright man. He loves to read. He loves to, he's still interested in life and his lyrics. We were lyricists, and I brought some music to the band initially, but we too did lyrics. And his inspirations were always coming from, books and different different ideas from the important lyrics from either existentialism, or Camus, or something which is like totally wacky, which was the Gargantua and the Gargantua and Rabelaisian
Probably.
stories. But yeah, he brought that these kind of lyrics to the band. I was the one that brought sort of more today's lyrics, like School Days, etc. So we combined our efforts lyrically on the first several albums. And I brought some of the music parts, but yeah, he was very important in that respect. We'd sit there and he said, "I've just read this book." I said, "Let me see." When we did Knots, for instance, we both read R.D. Laing's, and it was a hard read actually.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that inspired the lyrics to Knots, and actually putting that together musically together with lyrics was damn hard, but we did it.
You did it indeed, but it's also interesting that this was not a typical way to go in terms of what that era was in terms of pushing things. I mean, the importance, obviously, of In the Court of the Crimson King and 21st Century Schizoid Man and that kind of brutality of imagery is showing that, well, these are not just "I love you, baby, please come back to me" anymore. These are not those kinds of things.
No, these things, I mean, these lyrics have been done 18 million zillion times.
Yeah.
Who wants to read that out again? Let's make lyrics about something which people will talk about or not understand, but certainly lyrics which are somewhat meaningful. I just realized, actually, having just written the book and thought about the lyrics, etc., that I don't think there's one song that has the word love in it. And which I think is quite a feat, actually, in lyrics, actually, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure. It could. I may be completely wrong, but I kind of
write in the comments, folks, because I know you're out there and you're stewing on this already. But
I probably may put my foot in my mouth here.
But not so, because what's interesting too is I would point to things like "Think of Me with Kindness" and "A Reunion" and say those are relationship songs.
Of course, it's about love, but we don't.
But about it in a more, I don't know, emotional way, almost like interior.
Yeah, that's exactly what they are, and what the lyrics, both Phil's and mine, and then ultimately mine. Yeah, we to be obvious, and it's obvious. Anyone could say love. You go to II and say, "Write me a song about love," and you'll see love 150 times. But you feel love, you don't say it. That's about music and creativity as well.
I agree. Yeah. So, what was going on when I read in the book that Braun really disliked acquiring the taste? Because for so many of us, that's kind of like the next it's a level up for you guys.
He thought, I believe he thought we were going to develop into some kind of hard, like I developed Dream Theater, for instance.
Yes.
Just getting back into where I went. But that Giant, was the Gentle Giant. The first album was a developmental album, and then we go into something which is a little harder, like you mentioned Uriah Heep. Like they were originally called Spice, when they developed into this band, and they became this progressive rock pop band, and we came up with Acquiring the Taste, which kind of like it made him scratch his head completely and say, "What is this?" And to tell you the truth, it was we did it very quickly, as you know, and it was an album which, if you weren't an aficionado of interesting music, then it's a head scratcher. And he scratched his head saying, "I can't really work with this." And once he said that, having invested his time and money, we said, "Okay, that's fine. Thank you for being there. We'll look for someone else who can." And then we just jumped into the fire with the worldwide artist people, uh, which actually did us incredible amount of good, but also some crazy things during that period went on too, uh, in the world of crime and you know what. If you
Yeah. Well, I was also equally fascinated about the transition into, well, everybody's doing these huge double album concept albums. I don't know if Tommy had come out already at that point, but there was things that were going on. But Three Friends, before we even get into the music, you guys almost died on the way to that session. Is that true?
100%, absolutely. We were literally well, I mean, we were driving from Portsmouth where we lived. Ray was driving. It's a big car called a Zephyr Zodiac. That was our car, and it was raining. And there's a bend in the road. There's a dual carriageway. There's like a freeway, but small one in the road at the point near Guildford, which is halfway to Portsmouth to London, where we were recording. And Ray was driving, and the back wheels, I guess, started slipping. What you do when you start slipping is turn into the slide. Well, Ray didn't do that. He turned the other way, and the back of the car spun around, hit the barrier on the in the middle, turned over 2 times. I'll tell you this, so it turned over 2 times and then landed in a pathway about 10 feet from a huge cliff. It landed on a pathway. The wheels are completely gone. The pathway was the size of the car, and it landed on on the axle, and that was it. And there was glass shattered in the windows. So literally we are over the middle barrier onto the other side of the road, turned over again, and landed on a pathway 10 feet on a cliff. So I thought I was dead. I remember at the turn when we started slipping, I just did this. And I think I mentioned in the book, and a calm came over me. It's just, usually you think, holy shit, I'm panicking. Don't, hope nothing. I knew that where we were going was the end. And those moments, it was maybe 4 or 5 seconds of this. And in those 4 or 5 seconds, a huge calm came over me. And then that last bang happened. And for a second or two, yeah, I did. I thought that was it. And I kind of like looked around, and I realized, again, it was a kind of a twilight zone of the period. And I said, "Are you okay?" And everyone in the car, as well as Rhea, who was driving, were okay. We had some little glass on our arms and little scratches. And again, that situation it should have and could have been the end of the band and the end of our lives, but it wasn't. So and literally there was about 100-foot drop from the car to the floor to the bottom of the cliff. So we said, "Okay, you're okay, Phil. You're okay, Kerry. So what are we going to do? Let's get out of the car and let's go to the studio because we got a session to go to." And that's exactly what we did. We climbed, I mean, actually climb down from that pathway to the cliff there was a little stairway, and somehow we got down because there's little stairways and little grabways, and we got to the station, which is near Guildford. We got on the train, got to the studio, and recorded School Days.
You were not to be stopped. Unstoppable.
Absolutely, 100%.
Well, the car's a wreck, pun intended, and we are still alive. And there's a train down there.
Yep.
Let's get on that fucking train and get to our session. We're going to want to be late.
100%. Yeah, we made it on time. Malcolm was there. Malcolm Mortimer, who was our drummer. He was already in the studio, and I think maybe it's Wreck We Get. I'm not sure. I'm not even sure. Maybe it was. That's a good point. You made a good point. I'm not sure what song we were supposed to do that day, but we arrived at the studio, and Tony Visconti was there waiting for us, and we started the session at 2.
Oh, I'm actually think Wreck is before. Yeah, because it's three friends. Yeah. But yes, let's talk about Tony Visconti a little bit, because what a guy. I mean, and has proven to be a master over the years. But at this point, he hears you guys and he's completely devoted to what you're doing, your vision.
Absolutely. He was an incredible mentor for the band, recording different music that we had before. I mean, we recorded. I mean, me, Ray, and Phil had recorded many times. A studio wasn't new to us, but Tony saw our vision and basically became a seventh member. He was a member of the band, and his musicality and musicianship, as well as his engineering, was intrinsic in making Gentle Giant the way it was. I mean, he wrote the liner notes for the first album. He was recording Bowie's Man Who Sold the World and T-Rex at the same time as us. So we were hanging out at Trident Studios all together. And in fact, Tony asked, we were deciding what kind of cover we had to do, and we don't know. Let's, what he said. I've got a friend who is David Bowie's best friend, called George Underwood. Why don't you guys meet him? And George came, and we said, the record label was showing us things, and George said, let me try something. And he came back the next couple of days with this picture of this giant face and him holding the band in his hands. And we said, George, you're the one. We love that. So it's crazy in the fact that Tony introduces to David Bowie's best friend, who made Gentle Giant's face and our logo, if you like, for forever. And those people during that period of time in the very early 70s, we were all part of a group. We loved it. Bowie was there. He was a little shy, but Mark Bolan was like crazy, but we all loved each other, being around each other. In the other studio at the same time, Queen were recording with Roy Baker. And again, this is a period of time when everyone was experimenting, and in England, it was such an amazing time to be a musician in England during that period. But Tony was very intrinsic in mentoring Giant to be ultimately who we became.
And knew enough to trust you and also stay out of the way in many ways, where we both know how producers can get in the way.
Absolutely. Well, in the first album, he was very much hands-on. I mean, he did the recorder parts. I mean, that was him. In the second, Acquiring the Taste, Ray and myself, we were always pushing the envelope, and we were looking at what Tony did, how he handled the faders, and et cetera, and more Ray than me, but certainly. But we were always looking to say, okay, how do you do that, and how do you do that backward echo, and how did you get that stuff? So on the second album, Acquiring the Taste, he kind of sat there with us, and we put our hands on the faders and do things, and He said, "Okay, you guys do it," and he allowed us to do things. Certainly, Ray more than me, but certainly we did it together and carrying the band to do things that he would ordinarily say, "Stay away." So in that respect, he was incredible. He was incredibly important in the growth of where Gentle Giant would become.
And was perfectly comfortable and happy to include orchestral instruments and really open up the sound of the band to be kind of almost a chamber rock band.
He loved that. I mean, he was very much into that. He loved experimenting as well. He's a classically trained musician.
Yeah.
So, and classical music was his. Even though he's done incredible, other kinds of music that he loves, and we love classical music. Kerry, of course, has a degree in composition and percussion, and so classical music. In my house, we mentioned my dad. I talked about jazz, but we love classical music. That was that was music. Good music was. I hate to use that word, good, but
Well, Duke Ellington said there's only two kinds of music, right?
yes, he did. You're exactly correct. I don't want to say it, but I think you're right.
Okay, but you've hit it. There's the good kind. We like that.
Exactly. So anyway, so he loved experimenting and we love to do it. And we, literally that's what we did. You know,
Would you recall any of the particular classical stuff that you enjoyed? Was Bartok in there? I was always curious about some of the more modern stuff.
Ray was very much into, I mean, he played Bartok and the Shostakovich in school on violin. I mean, that was his thing. I mean, he was again very much classically trained on the violin, right? Bartok, but we like the sort of modern, the modernish classical composers, the Stravinskys and the Delius and Sibelius and the Romantics and have that's certainly Carrie's favorite was Tchaikovsky, who I love too because his melodies are superb and he brings in themes. You hear his themes in all the different parts of the symphonies and concertos. I mean, that's thematic stuff. And that's what Gentle Giant is about, by the way. You mentioned it earlier. You'd hear this part, which was a surprising part, but it was a theme.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get into that.
Well, it's fun, particularly for this program. I mean, we like to talk about composition, and I having had a really nice chat with Kerry about it. This is why one of the many reasons, but I think a core reason of why Giant has stood the test of time, because it's strong bones. It's the form of the music, the content. Thematically, rhythmically, melodically, instrumentally, and there's always something there to listen to. And you guys would get like, okay, I'll tell you, Quincy Jones once told me, I try to give people 4 or 5 things to listen to at a time. Now, apply that to Gentle Giant, and you have this very same thing where, I could listen to the bass part. I didn't really listen to that as much before. Oh, look at how it hooks into the keyboard part. Oh, look at how that gives a foundation for the vocal harmonies. And I've said in some of my writing that this was our American young men, students learning all these compositional concepts through pop music, essentially.
That's that's true. And in fact, that's how we wrote. What Gentle Giant had was we had probably ADD. We got very quickly. So we didn't do these long 3 or 4 minute pads of a mellotron that sounded like we got after 4 to 8 bars of something. Then let's move on and do so. Let's make that. Where's the theme in that? Let's move on to something else that will surprise and shock and have fun with it all, with ourselves first, and then the audience next. But boredom, that's something that the band disliked a great deal. We got bored very quickly with that's what we move around and move our time signatures and arrangements, etc. So, we just had fun with it, and hopefully it will come together, which it ultimately did.
And I think also worth mentioning that Lester Young said, "I try not to be a repeat offender."
That's true too. Exactly that. You
Yeah.
know, just progress, do something different.
Mm. So by the time you are getting into Three Friends, which for so many of us is just a masterpiece, and I've told Kerry this, that School Days still brings a tear when I listen to it. It's just such a beautiful capturing of that time in our lives. And time again, I speak to people and they say, yeah, School Days. It's like a universal. And I think that you mentioned that in the book. It is heavy, but it's also about reality.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's, you are a child, and you have aspirations, but you don't know what they are. But the friendships and your family and your the egos also are set aside. Egos are part of your growing up and thinking about who you're going to be. But at that period of time, when we talk about School Days, egos are set aside, and you are, they're different to when you're grown up. And I think that's something which children have, and that's which I wish that we could all continue like that. But unfortunately, you see what's going on everywhere else. And look, I don't want to get into politics or anything like this, but yeah, you grow up and become different, which is the way of the world.
It is.
So Karen Carpenter, and she would come. So anyway, we were doing I think it was a show, and she was there, and she was by the keyboards, and Carrie, before he was married, of course, started talking to her, and just, hey, how are you? Just a little chat, and she and after about 35, 40 minutes, we were watching this, just, and we heard I think Gary heard Carrie say, "Are you into music? I mean, do you know it?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm a singer, and there's a woman in a group called the Carpenters." I don't think Carrie even knew that what Carpenters were, actually. So,
What's so cool to me is like the greats know what they're hearing. So just as a great example of an early situation where somebody who's really listening to music and has a beautiful musical mind hears Giant and says, "Oh yeah, that's the stuff."
yeah.
And you had that.
Well, thank you. I hope so.
Well, you
So,
had Zappa. You had the ones in the know who really knew what was going on. So, Derek, I know you have a limited amount of time, and I would go on and on about every album with you, and maybe we'll do that another time. But the book really also cites in detail your transition into being a person who is essentially curating other people's music for the world to receive. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, the end of Giant for you, what that meant to you, and then really what you were going to do about it.
well, the end of Giant was we finished the album Civilian. We had fairly good hopes that it would work. It didn't, for reasons you'll read in the book. We recorded in California, which is uncomfortable for the band. The band, Carrie, Gary, well, no, Gary stayed, but Carrie, John, Ray, we all, we were there in LA. I decided that was a good idea. My fault. But Civilian was recorded there. I thought that having Columbia sign us again, we would get a real big push. civilly, and I thought the album was really good. I still do, by the way. I
I
think
still do too.
it was a different kind of Gentle Giant, but nevertheless, it had a lot of meat on the bones, I think.
Oh yeah.
But it didn't do well. So after it came out, we had a couple of tours lined up, one the US and then a European tour. Both Carrie and myself we just had our first child. My wife had our child born in LA, and Carrie's wife had their first child. And I think that when Civilian came back, it didn't really do anything. We had the tour planned. Um, I realized that this chapter, I did what I didn't want, and what we didn't want was to become a tribute band of Gentle Giant. And had it continued, I think, times were changing. The whole era of music was changing. Radio was changing. The way of marketing, and if we continued to be who we were, then the audience would start to fall away, and then we start to grasp at straws. I saw that there coming. I didn't want that. I didn't want it for me. I didn't want it for the band. I didn't want it for my family. So me and Carrie, I guess, Ray said, I said after this tour, I'm not going to continue. We sprung it on the band before the tour,
Uh-huh.
and Gary and John were, they were, wow, what? Come on! And I said, look, it was it was an incredible 10-year chapter. We worked hard. We worked our asses off. We really did. We gave it. We did, as I said in the book, we gave it everything we've had, in musically, personally, professionally, lyrically, across the board. But when you know it's not going to get any higher, and if it continues, it might get worse. Then stop now before it does. I've seen too many bands reunite and do this and do that, and it makes me cringe a little, to be honest with you. I didn't want to be a cringy band. I didn't want Gentle Giant to be a cringe band. And I think the same thing happened with Ray and Carrie and Gary and John, and we felt the same way. So that was the last tour, and we finished the tour, and I was living in LA at that time, primarily to look after the band. That's what I did, and I didn't have a plan B or plan A. But I knew that to continue would be wrong, because I just felt that if this isn't going to happen, then maybe a band member will leave in a week or two or next year. Then you have some other sub come in and you play the places where you used to play, but less so. And then I saw this map ahead of me, and I said, no, that's not who I am, not who we were. And then I got a call from a friend who I knew in England, at Chrysalis Records, who we were signed to. And he said, and I got a couple of artists to produce it, to be in other bands in LA. I said, no, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what I want to do, but obviously I'm not going to, do something else entirely. And he said, have you ever thought about being in a record company? I said, absolutely not. We're talking about apples and oranges, not apples and oranges, apples and Deadly Nightshade. But nevertheless, he said, look, there's Polygram is starting. Siemens and Phonogram put together this company, Polygram. We've got this new rock department. I think you'll be great because you know all these people that like you in the radio. Why don't you just come over to New York for an interview? Anyway, I said to my wife, what do you think? She said, just go and find out. I went to New York. I was offered a job in this so-called rock department, which was basically promoting and other bands on the label. And I said, what do you think, to my wife, Sharon? And she said, do it. And I remember the first day, so I moved to New York briefly and got a 3-month sublet before my family came over. And I remember the first day in my office, and I went from office to office and realized this is why Gentle Giant never made it, or made it in the way that the biggest bands ever made it, because we didn't have someone in there who was making sure that we were the number one priority. Every office had their priorities.
Right.
30 odd offices there, and they all thought, oh, have you heard this? Have you heard that? This is my favorite. And I realized that had I known then what I know now,
Right.
we would have we would have been where I guess Genesis or Yes were. But listen, we loved what we did. But so I learned that going in, the end of the first day, I called my wife and said, I'm not doing this. She said, hold on, just learn. I really did. My heart dropped to my floor, to my feet. But I learned, and I stayed around and learned how music was done in the business side. It wasn't about the music business. It was a business of music. And I learned that very quickly. But I kept my integrity, I hope. And I just wanted the bands to be authentic, to be real, and not to be followers, to be leaders. Anything, whether it was a rock band like a Bon Jovi or a metal band like Pantera or a Dream Theater, there were never bands that were followers. There were bands that were authentic and leaders in their field. And that's something I'm proud about. That on that side of the Deadly Nightshade side.
Well, yeah, and certainly authenticity is, I think, the currency for so many of the bands that we love. But the recent appearance of Black Sabbath story, where you showed them that they were being ripped off, shows first of all, an early brain for business, and also shows an advocacy for artists.
I absolutely made sure that when the artists that I was with, deals were done, that they were the most important. They make the music. They're the ones that are slaving away. I mean, if they don't, whatever, but they're the ones that are making these guys and me money. So I absolutely would advocate for them and get the best deal possible, no matter who it is. And there's some stories that I didn't even include in the book, like World Trade, for instance, when I was leaving Polygram to go run ATCO. I remember I told Billy's a great friend, Billy Sherwood. I introduced him to Kris and Kris, etc. But I knew that the people at Polygram, the head of, they were afraid that I would take a band that I was interested in over to ATCO. So I helped Billy and the manager get an incredible deal. I said, I'm going to take, I helped them out because they were afraid I was going to sign them to ATCO, and they got an incredible deal, which they deserved. But these stories are part you'll see in the book. But yeah, I was that advocate for, number one, authenticity, and number two, for the artists getting their fair share, and to get their fair push at the label I was with. I mean, not just to sign a band and forget about them. That was something I absolutely would never happen.
It reminds me of a Conan Doyle thing where Holmes realizes that he can't get this guy to be somewhat crooked, and just it'll be easier. It'll all go away. It'll be fine if you just, and you're that guy where you're saying, no, having been through the ringer and knowing what could happen to some of these bands, you're saying, no, I relate, because how many execs are veterans of the road, the studio, the process?
Well, that's something that helped me a great deal on that side of the fence. Was there was no band that could say, you don't know what it's like to not to sleep on the floor, or not to have not to have any food or per diems, or there was nothing that they could say that I didn't do, because I did everything, or I didn't have anything, or whatever. I could relate to anything they could relate to, that served me well.
I would love to talk a little bit about your brother Ray, who we lost recently, and is considered by so many of us to be one of the greats. one of
Absolutely.
the great bass players, one of the great multi-instrumentalists, one of the great composers.
100%. He's a musical genius, Ray. He probably more than any of our family takes after my father.
Hmm.
He was able to pick up any instrument and play it within 5 minutes. And his musicality was so incredible. I mean, composing, just with anything. I mean, he was a genius. Compositionally and musically, he could. I mean, he played. I see these best bass players, sort of charts everywhere. Ray's never mentioned, but honestly, he was probably way better than most of the BC out there. I mean, he did it with so much ease, and his lines
His lines.
amazing. Again, it was a thematic thing, and he'd play lines which were, you don't notice them, but they're just incredible on their own. So yeah, Ray, I've lost a brother and my best friend. The world has lost an incredible musician and someone who has been very important in music.
And for the folks who aren't really pinpointing on this, but if you're a Giant fan and you love Cogs and Cogs, if you're a Giant fan and you love the boys in the band, and the things that Ray is doing in those pieces are not other things that composers in rock music are doing.
No, this is Ray, and this is his genius, and he's left. Thankfully, you can still hear it and you can still feel it, which is great. What can I say?
I was always curious about this phenomenon, and you can, I guess, refute it or acknowledge it. But the idea of British audiences finding bands pretentious when they're ambitious, when they're musical, or they're maybe a bit more challenging to the ear. And then I hear about during the last period of Queen, how nobody really cared about them in England. So they said, fuck off. And they were playing everywhere else in the world. Was that something that inspired you to push harder? Was the British audiences at a certain point are not getting Giant?
British audiences are very snobby.
Yeah.
But we were particularly handicapped because, as you said before, as I mentioned, we come from a pop band with a big hit, a couple of big hits. So it was almost, how dare you play this kind of music when you're really a pop band? You're pretending, or that was kind of what we were fighting. So again, it was literally a millstone around our necks when we started Gentle Giant. You shouldn't do that. You're not allowed to. And that was a handicap from the start. I think that I get the feeling of that. No one said it that sort of literally, but I had a feeling that we weren't really allowed to progress to do something else. And the same went for several bands actually in that respect. They weren't given the latitude by the audience that there were so. You went over to Germany, you went to Italy. I mean, that was the first place we broke out of Italy.
Yeah.
We were massive in Italy.
And not just you.
No.
Genesis, yes. The Italy, they get it. Quebec, they get it.
Oh, yeah. There were certain, in South America, which we never played South America, but they were getting it before North America, in fact. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting that the Latin countries, if you like, had a feeling of have more soul, I guess is what it is. Have a feeling of maybe more authentic people. I don't know. I mean, it's something about a way of life, as of their living their lives as opposed to I can't remember the expression, working to live and living to work. Yeah. Whatever it is, but yeah, Italy was a big market for us. Even Germany was before England. Said, okay, you can play in big theaters and big venues, and then North America, but yeah, Quebec and Ontario, and then the major cities that we eventually started playing big venues in North America, not stadiums, but certainly like the Shrine Auditorium we sold out. It was 8,000 or whatever. So, we did okay.
Yeah. And I think a part of the charm or the connection with these countries is, you have a song working all day. You have this very much authentic, had lived it, we're talking about it, and we're bringing it, and people, I think, could really latch on to that. So the pretentiousness thing is unfair. I mean, Chris Welch treated yes to the same kind of thing with Topographic Oceans, and it's unfortunate because, okay, you can't hear it. Does that mean nobody should hear it?
No, the critic, we didn't, as you probably know, we didn't take that stuff seriously.
No.
We actually liked it. We actually had, this best of called Pretentious for the Sake of It.
Right.
That was one of the headlines in one of the, I think, NME, and we loved it. We thought it was, as opposed to hating it, it's great to embrace it. What a great headline. So,
and the theme of the book of you having the last laugh, whereas now we're looking at Giant and we're looking at how pervasive you become in even hip hop culture.
Yeah, that was an amazing thing for me. That blew me away, that the hip hop culture has really latched on to the music of Gentle Giant. It's really, having had these conversations with the biggest of the biggest, whether it's Travis Scott or Questlove or whoever it is, they've told me that the music of Giant inspired them to twist our music around and put it in their tracks, which, is fascinating. In fact, I was told that there's a phrase which I shouldn't use, but I'm going to use it. We have a ghetto pass. Have you heard that? Of course.
I haven't heard that, but again, working the reality, being attached to what it's like in life to struggle.
Yeah, exactly that. That's what we did. But we got through it, and here we are. I'm living in a nice place in New York City, and I'm happy to recall all these stories that are part of my history and a lot of other people's history. It's not rags to riches. It's just rags to enjoying life.
Yes. Well, I hope that you're enjoying all of the music that has come through Giant, and I hope you're enjoying all of the love that your Giant music is getting to this moment.
I am. I actually, in the last few years, I'm really enjoying a lot more than back in the day. I'm gratified. I feel very lucky that it's still around and people still are enjoying it.
And will do for many years to come. Derek Shulman, thank you so much. The book is Giant Steps, My Improbable Journey from Stage Lights to Executive Heights. It's coming out October 7th. It's available for pre-order anywhere, right, Derek? Amazon, wherever.
Yeah, bookstores, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-order, etc.
Yeah. And what a pleasure to speak with you, Derek. Truly you are one of the greats. And we love your music, and I'm going to go listen to Power and the Glory, since that's what Karen Carpenter was listening to at the time.
That was hilarious, honestly. Music business. Yeah, I'm a singer.
And all of the reissues, folks. Playing the Fool now in a new issue is out, and grab any of the new stuff that or the remastered stuff. It's so great, and always great to go back to Giant and year after year going back and I didn't spend enough time with River. I didn't spend enough time on, I don't know, there's so many, Mobile. These things that are, I think, just gems, and talk about deep cuts, and you guys have almost every cut is a deep cut. So,
yeah.
But Derek, Thank you so much again, everybody. Thank you. Please hit us on Patreon, like and subscribe. You're always going to find the best chats here about the music that we love. And Derek, you're a prince among men, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. Great to see you, Greg.
Thank you so much, everybody. See you next time.
Bye-bye.